A Science of Change, podcasting by Gilmore Crosby, social scientist, author, and organization development professional since 1984. Hi, Gil Crosby. Excited to be with you again, and I have as my special guest my father, Robert Crosby. One more time, our fourth podcast, and this time I wanted to explore connections of people that my father was taught by and mentored by with Kurt Lewin and his circle. And of course, one of Dad's longtime mentors was Ron Lippitt, who was directly in Lewin's circle, and just sort of explore any stories that maybe I've never heard about those roots. So, Dad, great to have you.
Thank you, Gil. Good to be here.
Here you are, a young 95. You'll be 96 soon.
Soon.
Happy birthday in advance.
Thank you.
Okay, and so we already spoke briefly about Walter Holcomb. He was your first T group leader, correct?
Yes.
So back in 1953, you happened upon him and his group dynamics program. And I believe you're saying that you're not sure how Holcomb got started in Lewin's circle with T groups.
Accurate. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Holcomb was a very eclectic man. He jumped around. I will say, not unlike some other people I know, like you and me. I'll be at the dinner table in the dining hall, and one word somebody will say in the middle of a sentence, and I'll be popped into some other idea or concept or whatever. Sort of like the way it's described when they talk about ADHD people.
It's our positive ADHD.
Yeah, it really is. I was diagnosed nervous condition when I was a kid, prior to ADHD and all that way back. That meant people who fidgeted and who talked a lot, talked out of place at times, and et cetera. Well, I saw Holcomb as a guy who could just move into all kinds of directions really fast. He was very brilliant. He could grasp what the things when he had very little knowledge of it. Not unlike my colleague, and I found him and I mentored him for a while, named John Scherer. John can hear an idea and understand dimensions of it that most of us have to have further information on, but he can get there fast.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the way Walter Holcomb was. Just one example, one day I was reading a book about the Little Red Schoolhouse, John Dewey's school in New York, and he saw me reading it, and he said, You're really into that, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, well, how would you like to go there? This was in a class. I said, I'd love it. So he excused himself from the class. 15 minutes later, he says, okay, class, we're going to New York next Monday.
Nice.
From Boston. So he jumped around. So I'm not surprised that he really knew the T group. How much in depth he knew it, I don't know.
Well, it had only existed 6 years.
Oh, it was amazing. It was a miracle, actually.
Yeah.
That I went to Boston. Of course, I didn't go there to have a T group. I didn't know such a thing existed. But it was a miracle that Boston University was having T groups. And as I knew T groups over the years, the one that I think I was in was quite true to what I think the traditional T group was.
The training group.
Yeah, it was a training group, and it dealt with the emotional dimensions But it also was very clear conceptually about how skills we needed to have.
Mm-hmm. This was Holcomb's group?
What?
You're talking about the very first one?
Yeah, Walter Holcomb's
Yeah.
group. I actually was in 2 T groups that year at Boston, each semester.
Both with Holcomb?
Yes.
Did he use newsprint?
Oh, wow. Well, he wrote on the wall a lot. Well, I don't know that there was newsprint or, it was whatever people had on the walls to write on.
Yeah, it probably wasn't flip charts because...
Oh, no, it wasn't flip chart.
Right. They weren't invented.
We did use newsprint a lot. That was early. I would go down to a newspaper and actually get some. They would have old rolls that had a lot of newsprint on that they were about to throw away.
Right.
Get them and bring them and cut them up and use them.
I always get a kick out of that. Times have changed. But we're still doing the same thing with the paper.
That's right.
Okay, so there you were with Holcomb at Boston University in seminary, and so you went to Bethel, Maine in what, 57? Or was it in the 60s?
In 57, I had taken a job in 55 in the Detroit Conference of the Methodist Church. And when I took the job, it was a camping job. I told the man who employed me, a marvelous man named Harold Bremer, I said to him, well, if I'm to help you at this camp, at their major camp, I need to hire people. I think I said 8 people, but maybe it was, I can't remember the number exactly. It could have only been 5, but I think it was 8. I said, I can't just do it on volunteers. You see, historically, the church had volunteers for their camp meetings and then what they called camps, which weren't really camps. They were out of doors, but there were preaching and classes. And you didn't cook fires and things like we did in camping, living in teepees and covered wagons and small groups and things. I say to him, I got to have these people. Well, that was great. He said, absolutely. Which meant that for 10 weeks, instead of volunteers, if I had 8 full-time people, that's 80 volunteers. They weren't getting enough volunteers to run their camps anymore. The camp meeting model had died. There were volunteers, but there weren't enough. So I hired these 8, and this also meant that I could integrate the camp. There were no black kids at camp or no black counselors. I hired about half my new staff were African American. It was wonderful. And it was the way I began integrating that whole thing in Michigan, because I actually ran several camps. And I began the first 2-week training with these people, partially doing some what I thought was T group. So I did my first T group with them, not for the whole 2 weeks. We did a lot of, they had to learn how to use an axe, how to build fires, how to live in the out of doors, which was a new discipline, frankly, in the church nationally, not just in the Methodist Church or United Brethren or Evangelical or United Brethren Church, but across the nation. And then in 57, the National Council of Churches teamed up with NTL, National Training Laboratories, which was headed up by Lewin Bradford, but which really encompassed the work of Kurt Lewin. And the 3 people really around that, the NTL then, were Ronald Lippitt and Leland Bradford and Ken Benne. And anyway, they teamed up with them at Green Lake, Wisconsin. So I said to Harold, hey, I want to go. It's about group dynamics, and we're doing small groups. Harold says, of course. So he funded it, and I went to Green Lake. And that was my first experience with Ronald Lippitt. At Green Lake, Wisconsin, National Council of Churches sponsored NTL training, 2-week training.
Nice.
The next year, in 58, I went back for a 3-week Train the Trainer with, again, those people, but a guy named, his last name was Crosby. I can't remember his first name. He was our trainer. And it was a fascinating 3-week training. Now, there were a lot of...
This was in Wisconsin again?
Oh, Green Lake, Wisconsin.
Okay.
Where, incidentally, several years later, I led the whole thing at Green Lake. About maybe a decade later, maybe 5 or 6 years later.
Okay.
But anyway, that's another story. But it was a marvelous 3-week training. It included that we led a weekend with people who came in, strangers.
Okay.
You know about it because I used the same model to develop Train the Trainers decades later at Leo's. And you were in one of those. And it was the same model.
I remember it well. And so this 1957 experience, the first time you went to Wisconsin and were with Lippitt and Benne and Bradford, that 2-week workshop, they did the what was really the traditional model of training you in basic skills, what they called basic skills, like managing conflict and so on, active listening probably, and having time where you were in more ambiguous T-group conversation about what's happening in the here and now and so on.
Yeah, there were about, I guess, 80 people at that conference, so there were many T groups.
Okay.
The T group was the basic group, and then there would be general sessions. That lectures on things related to it, and then we get back to the T group, and then we would have another group. I forget what it was called, but it was a practice group, skills practice group. We practiced various things. It wasn't as sharp as what we later learned from John Wallen.
Right.
You know, which you've been into, which certainly had to do with emotionality, feelings, things that like that. What's happening here and now? Absolutely, here and now was a big thing.
80 people, and there was just 3 staff?
Oh, no, there were more staff than that.
So they were the lead staff, but they had other people with them.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Incidentally, the next year when I went to this Train the Trainer for 3 weeks, we got to watch all these guys lead T groups. You know, you had a Ken Benne who, when you walked in the room, if you walked in the third day, the whole wall was covered with newsprint. He was very active. He would jump up, write this theory right in the middle of the T group. And you had a Ron Lippitt who was much more, by that standard, passive, that is not jumping around.
Probably more of an analytic.
He was. He would do, Ron would do interesting things like if he made an intervention, he would put on a ball cap so people could see he was now, I'm sorry, if he wanted to give a little lecturette, he'd put on a ball cap. He'd take it off. Otherwise, the other things he was saying was part of the milieu of the T group trying to struggle with its own existence. And, you know, each one was different, each of the 3.
Well, that's great. See, I had this image of you going to NTL Bethel in like 65 as if that was your first immersion with Lippitt and Benne and Bradford. So this is already helpful to me, at least.
Yeah, and that was, of course, in 65, that was a month. And it was the first, it was called an OD intern. Goodwin Watson, we had T group all month. And Goodwin Watson was my T group leader. Now, Goodwin he was the first editor of the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science.
Yes.
He was there right at the beginning. I don't know how much he was around Kurt Lewin, I believe he was. And he taught at Columbia. And I actually had hired him several times for a week when I was doing T groups for the Methodist Church in the 60s. I was in charge of, camping and, let's say, T group.
Like adult education?
No, not that broadly. More
okay.
like mandatory education as we would think of it in T group training, which would include the T groups and concepts about the group dynamics and things. I was in charge of that, and I could hire anybody I wanted. I had a budget that was amazing. So one of the persons I hired was Goodwin. And Goodwin, incidentally, he was an expert on Carl Jung. And I would say, I had an interesting dream last night. And Goodwin would say, oh, you were with some mythic figure. Anyway, eventually Goodwin said, are you going to the OD intern thing? And I said, what a OD intern thing? He said, well, it's a month at Bethel. And I said, well, I haven't heard of it. He said, well, you got to be there. So he right away called up the boss of my boss, the head of the whole Board of Education at in Nashville, Tennessee, for the Methodist Church, which I had now joined. I wasn't a Methodist when they hired me. And so he called him and he said, you got to have this guy there. So Leon Atkins said, absolutely. And he funded my whole month at Bethel then immediately. And I went with the whole family, including you.
Right, I remember.
And my oldest two boys were in day camp with Larry Lippitt leading it. And I remember one time when Kim, your oldest brother, gave a report with Ron Lippitt there.
That's great.
Yeah, Ron Lippitt was really impressed with it. But this was now we're in 65. A profound month for me, but definitely 57, 58. And I was doing all kinds of things that weren't at NTL or whatever, or at Green Lake in 59, 60, 61. It was becoming a passion for me.
So, just briefly, what I remember is being in water with Kim and Dave, my older brothers, and we had a boat that would sink. So we'd go out in it until it sank and then pull it back out of the water. That was my NTL experience in 1965.
How old were you then? My goodness.
6. I would have been 6.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, good grief. Well said, Patricia. Well, so now you dropped some names here when you're talking about 65 in your book, like Warner Burke was there. Did you have much interaction with him?
Well, the two people that led the whole month were Warner Burke and Goodwin Watson.
Okay.
So he did, and also during that month, we would have day-long workshops. On occasion, I think there was one 3-day workshop with everybody who was really active then. Bill Schutz, certainly. And he was into a lot of nonverbal kind of activities that were very controversial. Touching, for instance.
Uh-huh.
And then Bill Weir and his wife, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name.
Joyce, you have it here in the book.
Oh, I do?
Yeah, Joyce.
Oh, Joyce, yeah. Well, that was they were doing amazing things that I'm going to say included dance and other things, but I wasn't as much into what they were doing. But nevertheless, we experienced them. Chris Ardress came and spent time with us. It was just an amazing time. And yeah, I got to know Warner Burke, continued that association across the years, and as you know, in my memoirs, he wrote a most amazing endorsement of especially my knowledge of the T group.
Yeah, he endorsed my Lewin book too, which I appreciate.
Oh, great.
Quite a bit, yeah. Okay, well then, tell me more about Lippitt. Like, what are some stories that nobody's ever heard?
I don't know. See, I tapped into him, and he tapped into me over the years. I'm jumping now to when I was in Wausau. No, not Wausau, to Great Falls, Montana. That would have been in the late 60s, about 69, 68, I think. Yeah. And he called me and asked, he was doing a new series for Addison Wesley. It's a fine series. It was going to be including a regular disc you could put on an old-time recorder and play.
Like a record.
Yeah, but it was a smaller one.
Okay. Fancy.
And it went with there was a training, this thing you did with people, and it included his instructions. It included using, at times, parts of the disc or parts of the recording, I mean. So he wanted me to test one between parents and teenage kids. And so I found a church in Bozeman, went there and tested his material for him that he was using with Addison Wesley. It was wonderful material. It was a discussion between helping parents and children, young people, really, teenagers, discuss sexual activities in their life and how they were dealing with it. And I was already a certified sex educator by that time. And so helping him with that was a huge privilege. But I would call him and, we hired him, my goodness. John Scherer and I, when we started the People Performance Profile, which we sold to 600 companies.
Right? The first computer-generated survey, organizational culture survey.
Yeah, and we wanted it used in a survey feedback way. That is where the data would be gathered and fed back to the work group with their supervisor. And then they would problem solve, action research, and follow through with that. Well, we hired Ron to come and help us train many people. If we sold the product to someone, part of it was we would sell them coming to where were we then, Spokane, or I don't know.
Yeah, Spokane.
But they would come there, and Ron was part of many of those trainings. And we had,
Ron Lippitt was in Spokane?
Oh, many times. Well, he and when we were teaching at Whitworth, Ron came to the campus because he was writing a book with Ed Lindeman.
Huh.
It's a book on the future. You could find it. Yeah, it's Lindeman was, the president. I'll say this for your audience, president of Whitworth College. He was a futurist, a good friend of Buckminster Fuller. He was a consultant to the Congressional Committee on the Future. He was just an amazing man, amazing futurist.
He helped bring your vision of a T-group-based graduate program into being.
He didn't just help it. He said to me one day, I hear you're interested in doing that. And I said, I am. He says, why don't you do it here at Whitworth? I said, okay. And he walked me down the hall. He walked me down the hall from his office. And he said, to Dave Winter, the academic vice president, we have a new graduate program. I never filled out a form for this thing.
I bet Chris envies that story as he tries to get the state of Washington certification for Leos again.
Brother, wouldn't that be great? Actually, it was amazing. I had been doing a 30-day. They had a 30-day January class at Whitworth, and I was teaching it. When the head of the psych department said, "Come on, I want you to talk to Ed." I'd already done a lot of work with Ed. We had been often, or several times at least, co-designers for a conference, let's say of clergy, where I would help design how the clergy got involved. And Ed would provide the content, even though he became really good at designing himself. And then he hired me to work with his faculty and their spouses in weekend marriage workshops using the T-group methodology. Yeah, but Ron was at the campus and was a good friend of Ed Lindeman.
Did he ever come to the house?
Not to my house, no.
I came that close. I was in the same city as Ron Lippitt.
That's right. Yeah. We went to Coeur d'Alene, I remember, once for dinner, and
Cloud Nine?
yeah, it was a great restaurant.
That's where you used to take us when we each turned 21 to Cloud Nine in Coeur d'Alene.
That would have been it then. Anyway, he was high on a new wine. What was that? It was a Pinot Noir. Oh, there was just for him one red wine, and I remember that one. But he was a wonderful guy. I mean, just he was warm and friendly. You're right, he was very analytic, and I found that very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
My brother had been analytic, and so it was easy for me to connect with and feel loved by analytic people.
Yeah. Well, I've got one in my little brother who is a fine analytic practitioner.
Oh, you mean Chris?
Yes. He's not really little, he's younger.
Specific here.
Yeah, actually, he's a little bigger than me.
You're a little bigger, younger.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, so, and by the way, audience, I didn't introduce Patricia, but that's my wonderful stepmother that's pitched in a little here and there. Also a fine OD practitioner.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, he's been with me to Italy. I mean, we lived in Venice for 2 years while we worked in an Italian plant.
Mm-hmm.
We've lived in Tuscany for 13 months over a 15-year period, a month a year. And she's been with me while we worked in Russia, Ukraine, did a T group in Ukraine, and certainly a lot of work here in the United States and Mexico.
Right, you're a rare, I mean, there's others, like you just mentioned, the Weirs, if I'm pronouncing their name right, but a rare husband-wife OD team.
Indeed.
Right.
And I'm exploring a little of that myself now with my wife, and at least in diversity work.
Well, Ron's wife, Peggy, since you mentioned husband and wife, she was the one I'm reaching now. She created this. Oh, come on! If I could name it right, I think a lot of people would recognize it. It's where you have kids in one class teach kids in another class. Mm-hmm. Or it's kids in a class.
Peer group something.
Yeah.
You used that at the school that you created that I attended.
Well, this is a specific methodology she created.
Okay.
So, and what it had to do with was if you had a poor performing, let's say, fifth grader in math, then you would have that fifth grader who is poor performing teach fourth graders. Now, where that got violated was a lot of people, something like peer teaching or something like that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of schools, I've talked to a lot of people, and I said, you do, and I've named it, which I'm not doing now, but and they would say, oh yeah, we got our best fifth graders teaching the fourth graders. I said, no, that was not the intent of Peggy Lippitt. The intent was you get the poorest students teaching younger students, and the poorest students then learn a whole lot. They also understand learning difficulties more than kids who are making all straight A's. And anyway, it was so they were partners.
You know, I realize have some connection with the daughter. Is it Lippitt's daughter? Who else did you just mention? You mentioned Peggy Lippitt. So I think so. Yeah, it is. It's one of Lippitt's daughters.
I didn't know her.
Yeah, no worries. But I was wondering, did you have any connection with any of Lewin's family? Because they continued. Lewin's daughter was certainly a social scientist of eminence, and wrote a book I just started reading about Lewin. Did you ever run into any of those circles?
No.
So it's amazing how many people are out there, doing this work and continuing the work, the Lewin legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten to know, of course, Lewin's grandson.
Yes.
Anyway, so what Wallen? How about Wallen? So Wallen, took the behavioral, like the ability to observe behavior, and turned it into a more precise practice that we've been able to teach and apply, for thousands of people, certainly, as a tool that I think Lewin would have appreciated. He had observers when the T group was first invented. It was the observers of the day watching groups were then in the evening talking about what they'd observed, but they did not have the precision, so they were writing notes about when they thought there was conflict, but a lot of what was in their notes was their sort of judgments about whether or not people were listening, and probably accurate, but they weren't with the precision that Wallen brings. So how'd you meet Wallen?
Boy, that's an interesting question. First of all, I want to say this. If somebody writes notes and has their judgments in it, it's not going to be of the same precision.
Absolutely.
They have to know the difference between a judgment and a behavior description. And that's what Wallen was beyond. So when I moved to the Northwest, moved to Spokane from Great Falls, I got connected with the Northwest group, and it could have been through Dick Schmuck, who I had a lot of experiences with. He was a great student of Ron Lippitt, I think you know. And in fact, I did T groups with him at Temple University, training people in the training Methodist youth leaders across the United States in the 60s. And we would have them in a T group for a week, and then also in some role-playing, some meetings with youth. And then on the weekend, we had arranged meetings for them in local churches with youth. So it was a great training. In fact, Dick and I wrote an article on transfer of laboratory training, which was published by, I think, NTL or maybe, I don't know, one of those groups associated. It's a great article. It's still a damn good article.
I remember it.
But he was a significant person in this whole thing because Dick, Richard Schmuck, and Patricia Schmuck, who was his co-wife, and also there was another couple that taught. And he's very precise about the Wallen skills. Somehow or other, I think through Dick, immediately when I moved to Spokane, and through a couple guys, Dick Albertson and another leader at Central Washington, who was, I think, even a senior to Dick Albertson. They were in the sort of the NTL world. And at that time, NTL got organized by areas. So the Northwest group met with, you think about John Wallen leading it. That's where, and I went to the meeting. Here was John Wallen. And, I was stunned. I had the privilege then of doing 15 NTLT groups co-training with John Wallen. And John was super analytic, Harvard PhD, and then he went back and what do you get, a post-PhD or something? I don't know. But, he was just, super analytic. And I never had a person who I felt loved more by. I've had others I felt equally loved by, but he was a loving person, but very analytic.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a funny word because That also describes my brother, loving and analytic. But anyway, I latched onto him like crazy, and of course, doing 15 tea groups with him, I learned the 4 basic skills, which no one else was defining in the tea group world. I don't even think they are today. And
except us.
Except us, yeah. I mean, they'll talk about it's behavior skills training. That's what it originally was in 1947. What?
Yep.
Behavioral skills training. It ended up being the T on that, training T groups, but it was behavioral skills. But we're the ones that are precise about them, and we got it from John Wallen. I don't know what else to say about John Wallen. I had a lot of experiences with him, and it was interesting being in a coach leading a T group with him.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know if, what else. I mean, so he, by the time you met him, he was deeply connected to NTL.
Oh, very deeply, yeah.
And you probably don't know exactly how that started.
No, I don't.
Yeah, no worries. But, anything else about Wallen? Again, I mean, I enjoyed your little story about Ron and the wine.
Oh, well, I don't know. John and I were so much into our world that our conversations were about the application of all this to organizations. And
sure.
He was working with an organization, doing OD, and I forget the name of it. In fact, he had been full-time in an organization prior to the time I was mentioning about, and I can't remember the name of it.
Uh-huh.
So he was very much caught up in how you apply all this to organizations, and I'm sure he influenced me a lot in that direction, just by us working together.
How do you think you learned to create designs on paper napkins in restaurants? You think you just started doing that, or did one of those guys do the same thing?
I don't remember anybody else doing the same thing. I was thinking all the time, I still am, even about this article you're editing for me now. I was telling to her this morning, I was thinking, in fact, maybe it was in the middle of the night. Really?
More likely.
I was telling her, I thought of a couple of things I might want to add to that article. So, and about my poetry, I was walking up Drury Lane in London in 1977 when I went alone, and a poem came to mind. So I went into a bar. There was a napkin there, paper. I asked to borrow a pen, and I wrote the poem down.
Nice.
So it's been a custom of mine.
Yeah, great. Well, I have the same habit. So you were on Drury Lane. Is that the same one?
Yes. Have you seen the Muffin Man?
Okay, nice. And he lives on Drury Lane, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't think he does anymore, but he did.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you, Papa. That's great. That's what I was after. I'm just not wanting some of the connections to get lost and the origins. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, like the funniest thing you ever saw Benne, Bradford, and Lippitt do together.
No, I'm sure I'll think of things. We didn't even talk about so-and-so, but anyway, because when I was in Nashville especially, and could employ whoever I wanted, boy, I just went down the list of NTL trainers and co-trained with them.
Right.
It was amazing to have that kind of a budget, that kind of support from my bosses. I would go to the University of Michigan to Ron's office often, and we'd talk about what was coming up. And he'd say, well, I have this grad student oh God, I'm trying to remember the name. Some of them are, one of them especially, people might know.
That's how you met Dick Schmuck.
Yeah, Dick. Oh, I met Dick at Bethel.
Okay, but didn't
Yeah,
Ron point him out to you?
Yeah, I said to Ron one day at Bethel, I need someone to help me with such and such and such. He says, well, you need Dick Schmuck. There he is, walking up the street. So I left right away and ran and caught Dick. And we had amazing experiences together, Dick and I. We really, really loved each other. It was experiences in New Orleans, experiences with, they got me in trouble with my employers in Nashville. Not my employers, with some fellow staff. The experiences of going into a camp of 20 acres with dormitories where they obviously couldn't do outdoor camping, but having true believers in small group camping, which I was more experienced in than anybody on the national staff, and had spent a month with L.B. Sharp, who wrote his doctor's thesis under John Dewey. I spent a month living in a covered wagon with him. Anyway, we would go in there, Dick and I, and I'd look at the situation, and I'd say, well, I'm not going to train them in cookouts and living in shelters. They're not going to do that. I mean, they've only got 20 acres, for God's sake, and their budget is built around having 120 kids a week. They're going to teach Bible. And so let's help them organize the kids in such a way that the kids get involved rather than just lecture to them. So we taught the best we knew how, Dick and I, these counselors, and how to be with the kids and organize them for the things they did rather than go in and ignore everything they were going to do and try to teach them how to do cookouts and things like that, which they would never do because they weren't equipped to do it.
And that's what you got in trouble for?
Oh, yeah, I'd go back to Nashville. And the true believers, several women who were true believers, who themselves had never really helped develop camps.
They were true believers in small group camping design.
Exactly. And what happened was when they came to the staff, it hadn't become the rage. And so they go to this month training, and they become true believers. But I spent my life, years, helping camps make the transition from centralization camps, where there were lectures to kids and things, or sermons really, to where they were working in groups of 10 kids with 2 counselors in the woods. I mean, those were transitions that you had to make. You didn't just go in and, well, it was using Levine's methodology. You have to involve people. You can't just dump stuff on people, which is what my colleagues, bless their hearts, expected me to do. You were present, Gil, it was in Idaho, I think, when you had a conversation with Renee Pino.
I know I had conversations with Renee.
Amazing conversations. He was an amazing man. Well,
I mean, I was only, 4, 5, 6.
I was supposed to do the same thing in Idaho, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That got me in a lot of trouble on my job in Nashville. Yeah, those women complained. They were very influential. Well, there's a lot of stories that could unravel, but the change, Melvin Moody, who in a way discovered me when I was in college. I was a hell of a song leader.
Yes, you still are.
I could lead people. I turned them into a choir. And Melvin Moody came to see me at Camp Wanakee, or at Otterbein College, and asked me if I would come to Camp Wanakee, where I became the first full-time employee doing program in the church, not just at Camp Wanakee, because again, the historic tradition of camping in the church had been the camp meeting in the 19th century where preachers preached and you had Bible classes. And that's the volunteers you needed were preachers.
It was at a camp, but you didn't actually spend much time in the woods.
You didn't do any camping. Yeah, you lived in a cabin, but...
This is just a program, basically.
Right. It was an outdoor program, which was nice. But nevertheless, so Melvin was a master of change, a master of what you would agree would be from Kurt Lewin, his motto, change. And because he moves slowly in a conservative community that accused small group leaders often, small group camping leaders, of being, pantheist, and trying to teach pantheism to kids instead of Christianity and stuff. Whereas we saw it that we were in a small group where kids could interact, they could work together, they could build relationships, they could deal with conflicts, they could take responsibility, and rather than just sit there and listen to somebody lecturing to them. And so it was quite a conflict, but with Melvin, under Melvin's guidance, I learned how to do that transitional stuff, some of which I already talked about early on this when I got the job in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
It was, so by the time I hit the national staff, I had a huge amount of experience in how do you bring about change, and even to the point where, like I illustrated with Dick and I in that one place, I would recognize there's no way they're going to do small group camping. So what change do we want? What change we want is for kids, even if it's not the environment we want them to have a better environment for learning and for relating.
Which was also Lewinian, as it reflects Dewey also.
That's right. So that was all part of our picture, and I know I have a lot of stories. Even a few are popping into my head right now, but anyway, time's up, and it's been fun reminiscing.
It has been. So I'll think about what kind of conversation we might have next. This was, again, my intention was to understand the connections and some of the stories of people that you were with that were connected to Lewin's inner circle. And clearly there's still a lot of wisdom about experiential design and so on that you have to offer to the world. And then there was SARB. So we can still get back to that someday, which was a workshop, a process, an experience for couples.
Well, not just for couples. I mean, SARB is just a way of... Well, we were reading last night, Patricia and I read each night to each other from Joseph Campbell, where he's talking about marriage, and he's talking about passion and compassion, and how the commitment is to compassion. But passion can be wrapped up in that.
Mm-hmm.
But if passion alone, it just doesn't work. And as a long-term commitment. So SARB was about that.
Mm-hmm.
About trying to understand all that.
Not getting confused by just connecting with passion.
Or just falling in love, like the movie 10. Yeah, the movie 10. You see someone, you're in love with them.
Mm-hmm.
No, you may have a crush on them. You may be, drawn to them in a crazy way, in a crazy, wonderful way, actually. But commitment is when you look at a person, you say, I really want to care for this person the rest of their life. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. As you have done with each other.
We really do, and have and do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You're great role models.
Thank you. I think we are. I mean, we're we're just in awe at our own relationship, really. And I don't know, it's just wonderful.
It is, Dad. It's something to live for. Along with all your wisdom and also the Zags and the Pirates and so on. And the Steelers. Okay, well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone that's been listening. That is a wrap on today's podcast. Love you, Dad.
Love you. Bye.
Bye. Hey, I appreciate you listening. This, again, is Gil Crosby. And I want you to take advantage of what's available to you. I have many free materials. I am happy to talk to people about their situations, especially if you're trying to create change, either social change or organization change. We have frequent workshops that are available, T group workshops. If you have never been in a T group with us, then don't miss it in your life. It's many people have said to me, of all the trainings I've ever received, I got this one 30 years ago, and it's the only one that stuck with me. You're learning from your actual interactions with the other participants and with the faculty. The faculty are walking the same talk that they're teaching of behavioral skills. It's a training workshop. That's what the T stands for. This is done in the spirit of the creation of T groups by Kurt Lewin and his associates. It's for groups. It's for teams. That's how it was originally designed. It is a opportunity to learn about theory and put it directly into practice. Most the original design, you learn things and then you put them into practice. It was not just all ambiguity, which is how some T groups, most are led today, where the faculty hardly says anything. That's not how this is designed. So join us for that. There's always workshops. There's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which has certificate programs, a two-year program where you will learn from T groups and learn how to do all the organization development work that my father designed, most of it, and I continue that practice alongside my brother Chris and many other associates. So don't be a stranger. There's a lot going on. It's always changing. So be in touch, and it's on the website, crosbyod.com. I look forward to working with you in your organization or as you pursue things like reducing gun violence and decreasing racism in our society. Whatever your goals are, the social science of Kurt Lewin guides how to achieve those goals in a reliable way. And so that's what I apply and practice every day and invite you to.